Hello and welcome back to the Breath of Fresh Controversy podcast. My name is Zach. So today I'm going to do just a solo recording. I wanted to go over something that I had brought up before in some podcasts called the sexual arena theory. I just want to go over it as quickly as possible here. I'll try to make it as brief as I can, but there's a lot to cover. So I have this idea about human sexual selection and how it drives culture. It drives things like religion, storytelling, and many modes of being that I would argue anyone from every walk of life finds of value, if not the actual relationship advice that it suggests, and or sexual advice and all that. So, and a lot of it I do find in the literature of psychology and evolutionary biology is pretty grounded. But I want to try and articulate some of these more high resolution ideas and concepts into a way that it's easier to chew on for the average person. Something that'll actually help you in your everyday. I found some of it to be useful. I found some of it to be very controversial. I found some of it to be very provocative. But I think overall, the people that I've talked to about it have found it insightful. It's stirred up some great conversations. And, we're in a time now where we're lacking some of that. And everything seems to be overly politicized. So let's take a step back from some of the politics and some of the madness going on in the world. And let's chew on something else. Let's chew on something different. And hopefully you guys will think or find it useful and intriguing at least. So, first and foremost, we'll lay out some of the groundwork. So there was a study done. I think it was about 10,000 people per country. It was done cross-culturally. And they asked men and women what they look for or not necessarily what they look for, but they had men and women select long-term partners. Now, I forget how the study was done. I am assuming it was something like a Tinder or a Bumble, something similar where they gave them a picture, told them a little bit about their interests or their career, etc., their income. That's sort of social markers, cultural markers that we look at when we are trying to decide if we're interested in someone or not, right? And what the study found was about here's the fascinating bit of the research. The research indicated that only 15% of men are seen as worthy long-term partners by women, and it was almost 60% of women are found as suitable long-term partners for men. The study also found that women are less likely to settle for the 85% of men they found as unworthy than men are likely to settle for the 40% of women they found as unworthy or unacceptable long-term partners. So all that really says initially, I'm sure you're thinking the same thing I am, and that is that women are far more selective than men, and we see that out in nature. I always use the example of a bar, and so a good way to look at that research and see it in reality, right? Make a comparable, something you see out in the world, and that is, imagine you take those percentages, and we all are familiar with like a rating, a scale, right? Like a 1 to 10. Rate that movie 1 out of 10. Rate that book 1 out of 10. 10 being the best, 1 being the worst, right? We all do this with different things. So let's assume, and we rate each other. This is like a common thing. You'll say, oh, that girl was a 7 out of 10, or oh, that guy, he's a 5. He's like a 5 or a 6, right? So let's take that research and apply it to that same scale. So let's assume, let's say it's So 85% of men are seen as not suitable long-term partners. So let's say to be a suitable partner as a man, you have to be at least an 8.5 out of 10, right? For the majority of women, if not all women, to see you as a long-term suitable partner. And vice versa, for women, you have to be at least a 4 out of 10 as a woman to have, from the majority of men, if not all men, to find you as a suitable long-term partner. So let's say you have a man who's just below that. Let's say he's an 8 out of 10, right? Imagine a guy that's 8 out of 10. And imagine a girl who's a 5 out of 10, right? You can think about some of the locals in your town or whatever. When I say those numbers, I'm sure someone you're familiar with comes to mind on it, roughly. Imagine those two people go to a bar and they make a bet. And the bet is who can have more of the opposite sex buy them shots for free, right? So who can get more of the opposite sex to do them a favor and get them drunk? And usually when people buy each other drinks, it's because they're interested, right? Or they're friends. Let's say they go into a random bar in a couple towns over. They don't know anybody, right? Or a state away. And the bet is you have to try and get the opposite sex to buy you more shots. 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10 times, the 5 out of 10 girl's going to win, right? And so, rarely have I ever seen the time where a girl's like, "Oh yeah, let me get you a shot," to a good-looking guy. But the number of times I've seen, it's not even necessarily ugly guys. Even the good-looking guys will buy a girl a shot, and it's not even that she's anything special, right? So that's one way you can kind of see that research kind of play out in real life, and I think we're all sort of familiar with that. So it's very fascinating, and I took it a step further. I took it many steps further, and so I guess we'll jump into the next part of this before we dive into. I essentially was able to use the research and sort of categorize men and women each into 5 separate categories. So there's 5 different categories of men in sexual selection, and there's 5 categories of women. Within those categories, there are many different subcategories, right? Things are always far more complex than we, make them out to be. So, but for the purpose of the video, keeping it short and keeping it relative, again, trying to articulate high resolution things to something that the average day person can chew on. I'm going to try and I'm going to be a little bit reductionist, and I'd love to have more complex and complicated discussions about this in the future with any of you who are listening or other guests that we have on the podcast. So, before I dive into the 5 types of person and how that they manifest differently for men and women because of how selective women are as compared to men. There are other noteworthy differences between men and women. And this is where we're going to dive into a little bit of storytelling and religion, and how some of this the sexual selection mechanisms between men and women actually manifest in religion and storytelling. So, first and foremost, I would argue that women are more monogamous than men. Men are more polygamous, right? And we all sort of know this. It's not that women can't be polygamous, or it's not that men can't be monogamous and tame themselves, or women can't wild out, But I would say on average, if you were to give a man everything he wants, it involves a harem of some sort, right? It involves 12 wives and 30 children and all the money in the world, right? And if you were to ask the average woman, if you gave her everything she wants, what would she want? you're going to find either less sexual partners or like something like The Little House on the Prairie. It's going to be the perfect family with the perfect man, and enough children. And so I argue that men have a polygamous nature and women have a monogamous nature, and both those things serve a purpose, right? I think the monogamy of women tames men, and I think men have to be polygamous. If 85% of us are seen as unworthy, we have to be very sexually driven if we're going to procreate. So both of them have innate built-in natural mechanisms that serve both men and women and serve the progression of evolution, they serve the future of human society, etc., right? That's the grandeur hope, I guess. Now how those also manifest in the differences between men and women is that the hero stories we tell men and women are very different because the goals of men and women in sexual selection are very different, right? And I want to start with women. We'll start with women. The men is maybe a little easier to understand. And I think there's maybe more to talk about there. But I really want to speak to the power of women in my sexual arena theory, and that is that women are the force of nature. Women are the conscious force of nature that selects. Women are the selection mechanism of evolution. They are the conscious effort to progress humanity. Maybe I should change that to the subconscious force that selects. I think part of the selection is conscious. Clearly, it's conscious, but I think women are conscious of their selection. I don't know if they're conscious of the reasons for it. Like, why are they so much more selective than men? And I think that's more subconscious. I think that's something that's harder to articulate. So, but the things that are deep in our subconscious sort of trickle out via storytelling and archetypes and symbolism and mysticism and all that kind of stuff. And so I think one way some of that truth starts to sneak its way out via the archetypes is when you think of the goddess of nature, right? Or the god of nature, or the embodiment of nature and fertility. It's always a woman, right? It's in these ancient mythologies. It's always a feminine deity. So, and I think that's accurate. I think that's very accurate. So the hero and heroine myths of men and women differ. And they differ because our sexual journeys, our sexual stories, and our sexual conflict are different. Our roles are different. And these are important distinctions. And lately, you've seen it with the Avengers. There's this whole, backlash against Captain Marvel and the rise of feminism and all these different, cultural, political pushes here and there. But I don't think the Captain Marvel story tells the archetypal story of a woman. I think it tells the archetypal story of a man. And I know I'm going to get backlash. Oh, how can you say that? Oh, women can't be heroes. Yeah, of course they can be heroes. But there's more to it. There's definitely more to it. I think the heroine story is more something akin to Beauty and the Beast. To go back to the Captain Marvel thing, there's a reason why in the last, 10, 15 years, the comic has been rebooted 5 times. It's because no one's buying it, right? So as much as there might be people out there that want to say, oh, no, women can fit that role, it's like, yeah, well, people speak with what they buy. People speak with their purchase power. And if no one's buying it, it's not popular. Sorry. Or it's not as popular as other things, right? Like Twilight or like 50 Shades of Grey. And all these stories, Twilight, 50 Shades of Grey, Vampire Diaries, Beauty and the Beast, they all share an archetypal story. And that is the heroine story. That is the hero story of the feminine, of the woman. And that is, you have to tame a man. You have to tame the polygamous man. You have to make him better. You have to instill discipline in him, etc., etc. And it's not an easy task, right? But I think evolutionarily speaking, women are a more perfected creature than men are. And so the heroic duty of a woman, all other things set aside, is something like making men, attempting to help men get equal footing. And some people might take this as, it's all about the men. It's always about the men. It's like, no. You gotta understand what kind of person you have to become in order to do that. In order to be able to teach someone else anything. There's a journey there. And that's the heroic journey of the woman. That's the conflict of the woman. As opposed to the hero story. Now, the hero story of the man is far more. It's easier to pick out of that research that I cited earlier, and that is the hero story is the knight with a sword, trying to save the virgin princess or the virgin woman, usually guarded by a dragon deep in a cave or a castle or something crazy. And the story usually begins with there being a line of knights or heroes that have tried and tested the dragon before, and they've all failed. And so the hero's journey is the one man who doesn't die in the face of malevolence, right? And so evolutionarily speaking, you can look at the dragon guarding the virgin as like the sexual selection of death. And there is a biological death. If you as a creature don't procreate, there is a biological death. There is a disconnect. And that disconnects you from the future and the progression of humanity, right? And that can disconnect you in very, very deep, dark, and malevolent ways. So, there is the constant cultural motif of, the children, the future. What are you doing to make the world a better place? And we all, regardless of if we believe it or not, we are all acting in the interest of the future. And we are all acting in the interest of procreation. At least the vast majority, 99% of people, whatever, 90% of people. It's the vast majority of people are acting that way regardless of what they say. What they do is a far better indicator of who they are as a person and what they believe and what they hold to be true. So, that being said, the hero goes out and he's the one with a sword, right? It's like, why is it a sword? Well, it's because men have dicks and women have vaginas, okay? You can find a comedic symbolism in what a sword is, right? Men are used to gripping something. It's because they have something down there to grip, right? So that's why the hero takes a sword and slays death. He slays the biological death of not being found worthy by nature to continue his seed, right? To continue to progress humanity forward. He slays the dragon, he slays death, comes in the face of malevolence and kills it, slays it, and then he gets the virgin that all the other men were trying to save, right? Save, quote unquote, whatever that means. So, the sexual journey in the beginning, before children, is the man trying to prove himself to the woman. And if he does so properly, then he gets to procreate, right? And then I believe that is something like when the journey of the woman begins. and that is taming that man. So because to be a man that can come face to face with a dragon and kill it, well, you have to be a monster yourself. It's not going to be some overly nice guy that's going to kill the dragon. No. To slay a monster, you have to be a monster, right? That's the problem with all the men before, is that they were too weak. And weakness isn't necessarily, when I talk about these things, I'm not talking about brute force. I'm not talking about the man who's the brute strongest. It's like, no. It's this higher ideal. It's a principle, the principle of the hero. And I'm sure many of you have seen a plethora of stories with heroes. Harry Potter is a great example of a hero who got the virgin. He saved Ginny from the basilisk, right? That's why it's a powerful archetypal story, right? And they have children later on. But he wasn't strong. It wasn't a brute force or his muscles that helped him slay the basilisk. It was his wit. It was his courage, right? It was the help of his friends. And so it's those things that carry on, and those things that are true for the hero. Now back to the heroine myth. It becomes incumbent upon a woman to, a part of the sexual selection is that the women are going after the 15% of men who are worthy. And so it's kind of like the men compete, right, to see who's the best, and then the woman is sort of cut from the cream of the crop. So, but the real issue there is for women is that all the women want those guys. And so it creates women create higher standards for themselves because they've created such high standards for men. And therefore the competition they have amidst each other becomes very, very complicated, because the competition for men is to procreate or to die genetically. It's like you procreate or you don't. And if you don't, your seed dies with you. And I think that can put some men in a very dark place. And then the way in which that manifests in society, the unfair game here that we all have to play, I'll speak on a little bit later here. But women don't have to face the idea of not getting to have children, or at least not nearly as often as men do. But women are more likely to have to settle. And so the tragedy for each sex is different. The tragedy for men is that there may be a genetic death. There may be your line, your progression, your contribution to the future and human society as a whole might end with you. Whereas for women, they will be allowed to contribute, but figuring out how to contribute well is going to be difficult, and that is the challenge, right? Women will always be, for every woman out there, there is a man who will bang them on a dare, right? Let's imagine I'm trying to think of like the most ugly and deformed woman you could think of. There is some college goofball who will bang that girl on a dare, right? You will not find the reverse to be true. So, or at least not nearly as often. So, the heroine journey is something like the Beauty and the Beast or the Twilight, is that you find a monster, you find a man who is in the 15%, and you take him for all of his faults. And you teach him to be kind. You teach him to be gentle. You teach him to integrate his personality so that he isn't just something that can contend with death, but he's also someone who will be a good father and a good husband. Right? So, and that's the story of Beauty and the Beast and Twilight. And I haven't read 50 Shades of Grey, but I would assume something like that happens at the end. I don't know. Maybe I have to go read it. I quote that one because it's got the whole idea of a billionaire, powerful monster of a man, and women's obsession with, I shouldn't say maybe as a mischaracterization, the feminine desire for men who are, monstrous, and many things come with that, being manipulative, being successful, all that jazz, right? So, based on this game we all play with each other, the sexual game, it starts to manifest different groups of men and women, I would say. And again, I'm being entirely reductionistic with how I'm going to break everything down here. But so bear with me. Things are far more complicated than what I'm about to say. And some of what I'm about to say is a little controversial. Some of it you've seen your whole life. And it'll probably give you some orientation or better understanding of what you see. So I would say, I guess we'll start with women. We'll just keep going with that. So at the top of the distribution of women, you have the belles, right? Or the Bella, or I think Belle from Beauty and the Beast is a good representation, because in the beginning of the story, I'm using Disney's representation of the story. In the beginning of the story, she is a well-integrated person, right? She's beautiful, but she's not only beautiful. She's also incredibly brilliant. She's obsessed with books. She's very creative. She wants something more than this provincial life, right? She's constantly looking for something better, serving an infinite potential, and she's an interesting person, right? She's a very interesting person. She's not like shallow. She's not like beautiful and shallow, falling over her feet for Gaston, right? Like there's the other beautiful girls from the town who are just, all over Gaston. But she wants something more than that, right? And she's just as beautiful, if not more beautiful, than the other women. But there's more to her. She has more substance. So to be the thing that can tame a beast, to be the thing that can make the beast of a man better, is Belle, right? Is that characteristic. And so I would say that is like the highest ideal of a woman, right? Something like Belle from Beauty and the Beast. Below that, evolutionarily speaking, right? Because the Belles of the world are probably less than 1% of women out there, right? We don't meet very many people like that in the world. Evolutionarily speaking, and you might be able to flip-flop these things, but I'm just going to put them in the order I have here, here, maybe I should clarify a little bit. So Belle is the woman who gets to the top and tames a man in the top 15%. So that's like the highest ideal for a woman. A woman's hope is that she can get a man in the 15% and keep that man all to herself, right? And raise a family with that man. The next one down is a woman who gets a man out of the 15% of the best men, but has to share. And what do I mean by that? I mean they are not able to properly tame the polygamous monster of a man, or hero of a man, however you want to look at it, right? Because I would argue most of society looks at the men in the top 15% as either a hero or a monster, right? I think those things, that is very, whether you like him or whether you love him or you hate him, he's a hero to some people, he's a hero to many, and a monster to many as well, right? But that's sort of embodies a successful man. And like I said, to the whole dragon metaphor, you have to be both. You have to be both. So the second tier of women are the women who share the polygamous man because they decide to mate with him, to allow him to procreate, to serve the higher function of evolution, right? He has better genes than the other men in the distribution, so they will let those better genes pass on to serve the future, but they recognize they will not have the man all to themselves. And that usually has to do with the inability for them to manifest and integrate their personality as well as the Belle hero, the heroine, right? Because Belle can do that. So the third tier of women would be the women who decide that they are not going to share the cream of the crop. They choose monogamy over serving the future, i.e., allowing the best men to pass on their genes. But then they have to settle for men they see as unworthy in some fashion, right? So I would put that at the third rung. The fourth rung of women are women who cannot tame the 15% of men, but they don't want to settle. But we are social by nature, and so they decide to find a partner that is also female, right? So that's how I guess you could derive a lesbian group. So and bisexuals are probably somewhere between the women who just they are either like the women that decide to share, because being bisexual is not only is that a little bit of a turn on for the polygamous man who wants all the women. So it's like if he can have two women at once, great. And then that the woman, the way she's acting sexually is that, well, I can't have him to myself, but if I fool around with this other woman, then maybe I will get to pass on his seed, and that's better than to her, in her subconscious mind, arguably. I don't think a lot of this goes on in the conscious mind for many people, but in her subconscious, it would be something like, she doesn't have to settle for a lesser man, right? But if she, as far as the intersectionality of bisexuals in all of this, I think that's where they would sort of fit. It would be either there, or they're trying to figure out if they want to settle for a lesser man, or if they're just better off finding someone in a similar predicament as them, and therefore they don't have to change and challenge themselves to rise to any occasion. And there's utility in that. There's utility in self-service as opposed to serving the future, because you're not going to live in the future, and who the hell cares about the future, right? So they decide not to play the game. And then you have people, or they decide not to play the game, but they want to be social, and they want to have something like a relation with another person, right? Because we all want that. I think the most miserable place to be in all of this is completely alone. And then the fifth rung on the woman's side is the woman who doesn't want to tame themselves enough, like Belle, in order to tame one of the 15% of men. They don't want to share the 15% of men. They don't want to settle for a lesser man, but they refuse to find a partner that is of the same sex, and so therefore they decide not to play the game at all. And those might be like old cat ladies would be a good example of that, who are alone. They surround themselves with cats because they can't. They are not socially adept enough to surround themselves with other people, and some of that may very well be a choice, right? So those are sort of the 5 rungs of women and how they manifest. You have 5 rungs for men. I kind of break down the men in a similar way, but there are some clearly there are some slight changes. So for men, the hero, the epitome of the hero, I'm trying to think of a good archetype for that. I guess Harry Potter's not bad. Mufasa from Lion King's not bad. They are the man that tames themselves. They could have any woman they want, but they recognize that monogamy and being a father and all of that serves the future best, right? And we have clear evidence of when the parents stay together, that's what's best for the kids, right? So, so even in the ideal, even in the what the man thinks his ideal is, i.e., some King Solomon out of the some King Solomon biblical crap where he's got 300 wives. The issue is you're not serving the future well because you can't be a good father to 3,000 children. You're right. You can't be a good husband. You can't be a good father, and therefore you are not a good proper role model for the future. As a man, and it's really incumbent upon parents, both men and women, to be those proper role models for their children. So now that we have, at least 100 years of well-documented psychological evidence on the effects of split homes, or single parenting families for children, or non-biological parents families for children. We see it's very, very clear that on every measure you can think of, education, criminal activity, general interest, culture, all that stuff, emotional stability, mental stability, it's incumbent upon the biological parents to try to do what's best for the kids. Now, it's obviously clearly far more complicated than any of that, but the evidence is there. And it's not like I'm not making this stuff up. Everyone has a dog in the fight, whether they want to admit it or not. But objectively, we know what's good for children. And so you should want that as a father. If you're going to be procreating, you should want to be a good role model. You should want to be the Mufasa. You should want to be the Harry Potter. You should want to be this archetypal, good, positive, masculine role. You want to fit that. You want to fit that. And so that's what the epitome of a man, what a man is and what a man should be. That's what a man should be striving for, to be that proper hero. The next rung are like the vampires, the Daemon from Vampire Diaries, or some other good examples. Maybe Captain Jack Sparrow or something. Maybe not Captain Jack Sparrow. But the man who could have any woman he wants and does so, and gives into his polygamous nature. But the problem is you could do that, you can live that life, and men can unfortunately get away with it probably a lot longer than women can, if they tried, simply because life will not really catch up to you until you're like 50 as a guy, especially if you're a hyper successful millionaire or something, right? Or like a pro athlete. You can probably live that bachelor life till about 50. And then it's like your social circle is going to start slipping, and it's going to happen very, very slowly, and you could continue to be Hugh Hefner or whatever you want, later on into life, but it leaves a part of life unfulfilled. Like I said, it leaves a part of your contribution to the future unfulfilled, as in not being a good father or not being a father at all, right? Maybe you just sleep around and never get anyone pregnant until you're 80 and you pass on, right? So I would put that in the second rung. And that's probably what the majority of men in power, or in the sexual arena power, choose to do. I would say when you look at the vast majority of famous, wealthy, successful men that you know and you love, most of them have had more than one wife. Most of them have had more than one kid with a different woman, and they've definitely been caught cheating. So even some of my favorites, like Michael Jordan. I love Michael Jordan, but even he got caught cheating on his wife and everything. So there are literally every actor you can think of. Leonardo DiCaprio, he just sleeps around with a bunch of 20-year-olds, right? That was like the joke at the Golden Globes earlier this year. All of these men in hyper successful positions of power, they play to their polygamist primitive desires. So. The third rung of men, now we're getting below the 15% of men who are seen as worthy by the majority, if not all, of women. The third rung of men are men who are striving to be worthy but are not worthy. Maybe they're not striving. Maybe I'm glamorizing it too much. The men who are found as unworthy, right? But they're still trying to procreate. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And I think that's where you find a lot of romance. I will sort of draw some later conclusions here and come back to this, but I think the majority of people find themselves playing out in the middle, right? And that is that the women in the middle are found as worthy, but they're most likely settling, and the vast majority of men in the middle of the distribution are found as unworthy, but they are trying to procreate. And so that's where we find a lot of wonderful romance. Men who are striving to be a hero, but falling short, and women who are taming men who they would otherwise not be if they didn't treasure and value their monogamy as much, and what's good for the children and what's good for the future. So that's where the third rung of men would be. And then, like the fourth and fifth, very similarly, the fourth rung of men would be men who are not in the 15%, so they don't get to be Mufasa, and they don't get to be Mr. Playboy, right? But they decide, well, I don't want to play the game of being belittled by women, so but I don't want to be alone, and so I'm going to go find another partner. That's similar to me, with all my flaws and all my understandings of how the game is played, right? And mind you, I would say the fourth and fifth rung for women and the fourth rung for men are incredibly small groups of people, very, very small groups of the population. I want to recognize that they exist. I want to recognize all the options on the board of this strange Monopoly game we're playing, because there are multiple ways to think about it. But they are, I will say, they are relatively small groups. Most women will have children, as opposed to not having children, and most men, it's like 50-50. 50% of the men will get to procreate. 50%. There's a huge chunk of men who will not get to procreate. So understanding how that manifests is important. And that brings me to the fifth rung of men. And the fifth rung of men are these hyper-polygamous, sexualized creatures, biological creatures, that are not in the 15%. So they're not seen as worthy by women. And they are nowhere near trying hard enough or are good enough to even catch the eye of women. All men are trying to play the game. Men are all very, very hypersexual creatures, especially compared to women, I would say, on average. And I think the lower you get on the extreme for men, the more darker things get because of sexual repression. And so I think at the lower extremes of that, that's where you find things like the pedophiles, things like rapists, things like men who are obsessed with murder and war, men who are incredibly nihilistic, because when you are faced with this kit of biology that is telling you you should procreate, and everything around you is telling you you're not good enough, how else is that going to manifest? You tell me. I don't think we put those guys in a good spot. But as strange as it is, it might be what is necessary in order to progress humans forward in general. As awful as that might sound, I don't know. I think, and so overall, there's most of the guts of the theory, right? And so I think well, first of all, when I found all this out and started to piece it all together, I found it incredibly fascinating, and I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments. And if you guys have any questions, feel free. We can do a Skype session here and record it and throw it on the podcast. I'd love to have plenty of people challenge it, articulate your thoughts about it, your understandings of it, etc. I think it's a solid idea, and I've been trying to beat it with a hammer and see if it still works. And so far, it's pretty solid. It's pretty strong. Haven't had anybody tell me anything too much to break it. So definitely, I want to throw it out there to talk about it. I want to throw it out there to accept challenge, and let's try to break it, because I think a lot of it, although there are parts of it that might sound self-serving to people. Here's an example. If a man has a child with a woman, he might say, "Oh, I'm in the top 15% of men." The problem is, there are, I think the majority, like I was saying before, and I guess I'll elaborate on this. The majority of the distribution, so I would say the women between a rating of 3 and 8, and the men between a rating of 3 and 8, right? Or 4 and 8. Let's say 4 and 8. The women who are on a scale between 4 and 8, and the men between the scale of 4 and 8, based on the research that I cited in the beginning, the women would be found as worthy, and the men would all be found as unworthy. And so, but that's where the majority of men and women are sitting. So the experiment most of us are playing out is men trying to prove themselves to women, right, via romance, and then women deciding that having a father figure in the child's life is better than a world where we only allow the 15% of men to mate, having to share the hyper-successful men with other women, and also leaving a larger population of men ostracized. And I would argue the men who are left ostracized become the malevolent force of death in society. They become something like the dragon that has to be competed with, wrestled with, or let alone physically protect. You have to physically protect you and your family from. I would say most of the vile and dangerous men in the world end up falling in the ostracized category. And I would cite things like criminals, rapists, school shooters, pedophiles, etc. I would throw them in that category. Very seldom is it hyper-successful men that end up doing those things. By female standards, I should say that, right? So maybe you say, well, what about the Pope? The Pope is a pedophile. What about Jeffrey Epstein? He's a pedophile. And it's like, well, maybe he's a pedophile because women his age find him unworthy. Maybe he was a pedophile because he found himself as undesirable by women of age, and therefore he pursued women who are underage because they're more manipulatable and susceptible to manipulation. Same thing with the Pope. Pope literally might have all been sexual repression. I think a lot of the religious pedophilia is a lot of sexual repression. It's where the biblical laws and everything are going a little too far, or maybe they're taking their religion a little too seriously. They're not getting the better underlying messages, and they're reading something else into it. And because of that, they swear off sex. Weird thing to do. It's like, if God wanted you to sell off sex, swear off sex, why would he give you a dick and balls? It doesn't make any sense, right? Why would he give any of us the sex organs and everything, and all this desire to do the deed? It doesn't make a lot of sense. But then again, there's, plenty of criticism to go around. So in those two regards, I think those are, again, it becomes more complicated, and there is a different sort of perception you have to take to who is a worthy and successful man. as a sexual being rather than what we deem as successful in culture, based on different markers. So, yeah. And I think some of this you can also, I really like using different cultural, customary references. I've referenced Harry Potter, I've referenced Beauty and the Beast and Twilight here, and I've referenced Lion King. I'm going to go back to the Lion King reference. I think that Mufasa properly embodies the virtue of the positive man, the positive masculinity, right? The tamed man who's a good father and a good husband, and leads, right? And then you have his wife. I'm trying to think of what her name is. It escapes me. I'm only thinking of Nala, and Nala's the one that tames Simba, right? And again, that makes Lion King a very truthfully archetypal story, and I really, really like it because when you look at the women in The Lion King, they are not these meek and timid virgin princesses. They are powerful lionesses, right? Simba doesn't win in the end without the power of the lionesses against the hyenas, right? And Scar. And Simba himself gets pinned by Nala, and Nala kind of shakes him out of his delusion and goes, hey, dude, you got to stop doing all this Hakuna Matata crap. You've got shit to do because the malevolent force in the world has taken over, and you have to restore a better positive masculine figure like your father, right? So, and I think some of that we're seeing today. I've mentioned this in other podcasts as well. I think we are seeing in culture right now the rise of Scar, or an age of Scar, and it leaves the lionesses hungry, right? The hyenas get to eat first. And a lot of that is because culture has sort of killed positive masculinity and claimed it was the virtuous right of feminism to do so. And I think the power, the empowerment of women has been amazing and something we definitely shouldn't dispense with. And you can have that as well as having positive masculinity side by side. I think that's what you need. But I think something happened culturally, and maybe it was simply the malevolent force of ostracized men, like how Scar went after Mufasa. It is simply the malevolent force of weak men that pushed the feminist ideology to its extremes in order to kill positive masculinity. And what has that done? Well, that allows for things like Tinder and birth control to be used in favor of the ostracized man who would otherwise not be able to mate. I think things like all of this, a lot of technologies that are coming out now play in favor of the weaker men in society, and all to their that's what nature and all of this is telling them to do. They have to fight for their survival. They have to fight for their place to continue their seed, right? And they're doing everything that's necessary to do that. But some of that can become twisted and malevolent. And I don't know if it serves the future. Just like I don't think the age of Scar was very well for the Pride Lands. And we have to reinstill some of that missing positive masculinity. How do we do that? Well, I think understanding some of these concepts might help. It might give us some better orientation for what it means to be a good man, what it means to be a good woman, how we can strive for those things together, and ultimately serve the future. So I'll leave you with that for today. I'm sure I will return to this subject because it fascinates me, and I'm looking forward to what you guys have to say in the comments. And yeah, all right. Until next time, I'll be signing off.